I learned a whole new meaning of the word be still, because I had no choice. It was just to be with it. Now, I'd had this profound experience, but the grief and the pain and the trauma, and I was in the hospital for almost 6 months. And there was certainly resilience about that. I mean, there was tools. It's like, okay, in this stillness, in this, where do I really go?
Welcome to another episode of Relentlessly Resilient, presented by Miki Couture, a weekly podcast where people share real-life experiences and the tools they develop to move forward and live their best life. I'm Michelle Scharf, and my co-host Jenny is out. We're recording today on Veterans Day, so she is out honoring our veterans. So I'm pleased to be here with producer Kelly Ann Halverson.
Hi.
She is the best producer around.
You know, it's a good way to show people some appreciation. Giving them a Miki.
Oh, I agree. I agree.
As always, we're presented by Miki Couture. They have the best blankets out there. You know, I've been seeing a lot of people trying to copy them lately. Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
Different
Yep.
billboards?
Yep.
But, you know, they're the original. They have their heartfelt message. You know, it started with the owner wanting to create beautiful soft blankets for her grandkids, and particularly those that had been in the hospital.
Right.
And, you know, there's just nothing like an actual Miki.
You know, and I got to tell you, the travel size, you brought up the hospital.
Mhm.
The travel size blanket is perfect for anyone who's in a hospital bed. It's the perfect width. It's the perfect length. It is.
It's my
spot
movie
on.
Miki. The travel signs is my movie Miki.
Yeah,
so, you know,
absolutely.
and they're pretty good priced as well. And there's always great deals going on. So
Absolutely. Go out and find your Miki. And they always have great deals right now. Right now, going
yes,
into the
Miki
holiday.
Mondays is usually when I get my texts, or sometimes Friday going into a weekend if it's a bigger sale. But
Yeah.
you get the texts for the
Yeah,
discount.
absolutely.
6 locations in Utah and online at mikicouture.com.
Yep. Thank you. Today we have with us an amazing man. His name is Jeffery Olsen, and he is a #1 international bestseller. And I want to introduce you to Jeffery. Jeffery, welcome to our podcast.
Michelle, it's good to be with you guys. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about you.
Oh gosh, I'm a pretty regular, normal guy actually, but yeah, I grew up on a little family farm in the Wasatch Back up near Heber City in a little town called Charleston.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, left the farm and played Division I football at Utah State up in Logan. And I'm currently working as a creative director and have worked at that my whole professional career. But as we'll talk about later, I have been doing things all over the world, actually. It's been a pretty interesting ride.
That's amazing. I think it's really cool. You were mentioning to me earlier that you are the creative director for BYUtv and that you have been nominated this past year for 7 nominations.
Yeah, 7 Emmys. This is the big thing. Even Hollywood's taking note. I mean, we dove in about 6 years ago. I was recruited to come here for a rebrand, redoing the content, and literally stepping into becoming a content provider for everyone, you know, for people of all walks of life. And gosh, we've worked very hard at it, but it's been great. I mean, we're doing different content. It's content, like I say, is even being recognized by Hollywood, you know, 7 Emmy nominations. We have great partners. You know, we're working with everyone from, you know, BBC in London to local producers and groups to get things accomplished and done. But it's been an interesting and a good run. And
That's
and
amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot to be proud of. I think that's pretty cool. Well, the one
We've
thing,
got an incredible team. It's not on me. I'm just
Right.
I'm just one of the people. Yeah.
well, it's great to be a part of it, right? Something so amazing that's happening there. It used to be very much just an LDS kind of specialized television. And now what you're saying is that it's branching out and the content is reaching a lot of different people. And that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the whole intention. In fact, all of our growth is coming from California, New York, Florida, Texas, and in the Midwest, like Chicago. It's where the population is. So
those are the things that you do, but you also do some other things. And I'm really excited because you're going to partner with me in April, on April 25th and 26th, for a resiliency retreat, which will take place at Fort Douglas. And so I'm really excited to have you be a part of that.
Yeah, so I'm excited for that as well. And yeah, we all have things we do. I mean,
Right.
the jobs, the things we do, but then there's things that perhaps what we're called to. It's what we be. It's something different, and that's what we'll talk about today because I'm referring to my work and my job, which I'm lucky enough to do something that I feel makes a positive change in the world. But the authoring of the book and the things that way was based on something that was far more devastating and took far more resilience than coming to work and doing content that gets recognized. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's hear a little bit about your path to resiliency and how you got there.
Wow, maybe we're all still getting there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had a horrible automobile accident, and it's been 27 years ago. So it's been a while. And it took time for me to even talk about this, quite honestly. I couldn't even talk about it for almost a decade. But years ago, we were on a family vacation. The whole family was in the car. It was me, my wife, and our two young boys. And on the way back from that, we had a horrific automobile accident. All of us were in the car. I had the cruise control set at 75 miles per hour. And there was reports of crosswinds. There was reports of a pickup truck that was driving erratically on the interstate. One of the toughest things maybe about the story is I believe I may have just dozed off, just not just, have you ever done that where you
Oh,
just kind
yeah.
of,
Yeah.
I mean, I was a young father. I was 33 years old. I was, doing those 14, 16-hour days to provide and protect and do the things that we do in that age range. I'm still working 14, 16 hours a day. But anyway, we were driving home and I believe I may have dozed off. But whatever happened, I swerved to the right, I overcorrected to the left, and I lost control of the car. And it began to roll not off the road, but down the concrete of the interstate at 75 miles an hour. And it was a horrific automobile accident. They say the car probably rolled no less than 6 to 8 times. I blacked out the actual rolling. But when the car came to a stop, when the car finally stopped, I was completely conscious. And the first thing I heard was my 7-year-old, who was in the seat behind me, crying hysterically. And as a father, I thought, I've got to get to my boy. I've got to get to my boy. But that's when I realized I couldn't move. I was pinned either to the floorboard or the seat. I couldn't tell. There was all the broken glass, the smell of gasoline. And I was unaware of my injuries. What had actually happened is both of my legs had been crushed. My left leg was amputated above the knee. My spine had been cracked in two places. Ironically, it didn't damage the spinal column. Um, my right arm was nearly torn off. My rib cage was damaged. My lungs were collapsing, and the seatbelt cut through and ruptured all my insides. But all I knew is that, gosh, my son's crying. I've got to get to my son. And that's when the brutal reality hit that no one else was crying.
Oh,
And I knew in that moment, and I won't get into the details of what I saw or what I experienced, but I knew that my wife and my youngest son were gone. They were killed instantly in the accident. And any of the physical stuff was nothing compared to the emotional trauma. And in that moment, just the regret that how do I get those 3 seconds back? What happened? Did I fall asleep? How did we end up like this? And I don't share that to be morbid or graphic, but that's the worst hell anybody could be in. I mean, I've got a hysterical child I can't get to. I'm losing consciousness. Half the family has passed, and I was driving the car. And in that setting, in that situation, that something very interesting happened. And I'm certain this bolstered my resilience. But in that darkness, light came. I mean, there I was in this most horrible situation I could even imagine, and light came. It felt like light came to me. Light surrounded me. Light was comforting me. It felt like I was actually lifted or delivered out of this horrible accident. And suddenly I could breathe. I felt I was more alive than ever. And I was somewhat confused about, wow, what's happening? How can I be okay? And then in light, this what, this holding place, this bubble of light, words are sometimes difficult to describe. But in that situation, my wife, who I knew deceased at the scene, suddenly she's there with me. She's right there. And she's very much alive. Beautiful, radiant. There's no injuries. She's gorgeous, but she's emphatic that I can't come with. She's like, Jeff, you've got to go back. You've got to go back. You can't come. You've got to go back. And we literally had this conversation. No, I don't know. You know, she couldn't come back, but for whatever reason, we got to make a choice. And we talked about if I stayed with her, our surviving son, who was 7, my little son who passed in the accident was a toddler. He was just a little guy, 14 months old. But if I stayed with her, our oldest son would be orphaned. And we had the conversation, we can't do that. You got to go back. And we literally made a choice. I made a deal. I'll go back. I wanted to stay. I did, you know, I mean, I was well aware of what had happened, but we made a choice, and I made the choice to come back. And in doing so, but we have no idea how powerful our thoughts and our choices are. I didn't have to figure out, how do I go back?
Right.
When I chose, I'm going back, then whoosh, you know, all of a sudden I find myself moving about. And I say moving about, as we'll get to, I'm moving about this busy level 1 trauma center or hospital. And I have no concept of time in this bubble of light. I was aware that I had crashed the car and what had happened. But what I wasn't aware of is people had arrived at the scene, you know, emergency services were called. Spencer, my 7-year-old, he was banged up a little bit. He broke his wrist and his ribs were all, but he physically kind of walked away from the accident. I had to be extricated from the car because of my injuries. I had to be life flighted or airlifted to the nearest level 1 trauma center. I wasn't aware of all of that. I knew I'd crashed. I knew half the family had passed. I knew I had had this conversation and said the most profound goodbye I'll ever say. And then I'm moving about this hospital. You know, I'm seeing the doctors and the patients it was almost like I had 360 awareness. Mm-hmm. I was aware of patients, the families of the patients, everyone I saw, everyone I encountered. It's like I knew them. I was connected to them. They were strangers in this third dimension, but I knew them. I mean, you know, a nurse passed by, completely unaware of me, but I knew in an instant. I felt her life. I became aware, almost in a connected way, of the abuse that she had received as a child. It's like I knew it. I almost experienced it. I was aware of it. And yet in that same instance, I saw her magnificence. I mean, here's this woman serving, you know, helping in the hospital. And that was true of everyone I saw. There was this absolute connectedness and this awareness and this profound honor, if you will, of who they truly are. Mm-hmm. And I was going through all this until I finally came upon a body or a man on a gurney that I didn't feel anything from, which I thought was odd. So I stepped closer to look. And that's when I realized, oh my gosh, that's me. And that's when I realized, oh my gosh, that's me. But that wasn't me. I mean, I was having this profound connected experience. There was my body. There was my, you know, the skin suit. There was the flesh that I wandering around.
I call it the meat sack.
Yeah, a meat sack.
That's what I refer to it too. I've had those experiences myself, Jeff, and it makes you profoundly aware that we're just wearing these meat sacks. They're these bones and flesh, and they're mortal, but that's not really who we are. Our spirits are who we are. And when we can stay connected to that in the real world, we can have those experiences where we understand a little bit more empathetically that other people are struggling as well. And I think that's one of the reasons why people so readily tell me their traumas. I'm just a magnet for it. Anywhere I go, people will start just feeling like that they can tell me something. So I understand. I hear you.
That's awesome.
It's an amazing experience once
Yeah.
you start to understand that we are limitless, and that this, you talked about the linear aspect. Time is only relevant to us here. It's kind of funny that we all consign to these clocks, and everything we do is scheduled and measured, and it's all very linear here. But our spirits and who we truly are eternal, and they don't have the same time constraints.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more. And, having that connectedness, that oneness, not only to my being, my consciousness, my spirit, but to feel that from everyone I encountered. And it didn't matter what they had done or hadn't done, I mean, there was no judgment. There was this magnificent connection. And even the meat sack. And and that I laugh and call it that too. But boy, there was such a reverence as I looked at the body. I'm like, wow, I mean, I thought I took it for granted.
Yep.
I didn't realize that I don't have to remind my heart to beat. I don't have to think about breathing in my lungs or teaching my eyes how to see. And I mean, I looked at my body, which was so broken. And yet I thought, wow, I never realized what a magnificent gift it is to be in the meat sack, to have the physicality, touch, taste, smell, sight, all of it. And so there was this reverence. It's like, I got to get back in. And yet mine is so broken. And again, the power of our thoughts, it's like, okay, I'm going back in. Then boom, back to the denseness. And this is where meat sack, I mean, boy, I was
You feel it, right? You feel the heaviness of it.
Yeah, the heaviness and even the emotions of the regret, the trauma, the guilt, the pain, it all came back, and I was ventilated. They had a big tube doing the breathing for my lungs that had collapsed. My legs were immobile because they'd been crushed. My right arm was immobile because it had nearly been torn off. And then they eventually tied down my left hand because I kept grabbing at everything. But I learned a whole new meaning of the word be still, because I had no choice. It was just to be with it. Now, I'd had this profound experience, but the grief and the pain and the trauma. And I was in the hospital for almost 6 months. I had 18 surgeries in all, putting me back together. And there was certainly resilience about that.
Yeah.
I mean, there was tools. It's like, okay, in this stillness, in this, where do I really go? And of course it was all the, why God, why this, I mean, but there was also the shift of, I can't change it. I can't change it. This has happened. So instead of the why, and this was probably months into the hospital stay, I began to ask, okay, what am I learning? What am I experiencing? What do I do? What can I bring? How can I serve others, like the experience of the nurse in the hallway? How can I take trauma? And how can that be transferred to compassion, to empathy, to a higher way of being? I mean, it was interesting. One of the most profound experiences I had was actually at the end of my hospital stay. And it's probably worth pointing out, Michelle, I'm so thrilled that you've had, and it's more common than people know, these experiences, these out-of-body stuff. But it's worth pointing out, my most profound experiences were at the scene of the accident, before morphine and all the narcotics had been administered. The end of my hospital stay, when I was off of all the morphine, I mean, I was out of ICU, I was out of surgical recovery, I had moved right into the rehabilitation wing. This was only a couple of weeks before coming home. And I went into a peaceful, deep sleep. They had finally stabilized my abdomen. I mean, the infections I had, and I kept throwing pulmonary emboli, the blood clots that lodge. But I was finally where they had stabilized things. I could lay on my side. I'd laid on my back so long, I'd rubbed all the hair off the back of my head. I was bald on the back of my head, and my brothers were giving me a bad time about that. But in this scenario, I naturally sleep on my side, and I fell into a deep sleep. And in that sleep, I felt that light again. I'm like, here's that light. And it's like I was sleeping, but I was so aware, so consciously aware. And my grief was so heavy, especially about my little boy and what had happened, and my wife too. But it's the grief. But that light comforted me. It felt again like I rose above the hospital bed, but this time the light dispensed. It like went away. And I was in the most beautiful place. I mean, people can say heaven or the other side or the spirit world. There's all kinds of names. The only word that even comes close to what I experienced is I was home. I was home. It's like and I was whole. I had both legs and both feet, and I actually began to run. And the reason I mentioned the body, it's strange. Now, I believe I was out of the body, but I was having a physical experience. I could feel the energy of the ground beneath my feet. I mean, I could feel the intelligence in my thighs, and I was running, and I'm like, wow, I'm home. And then I got the message, you're not here to stay. And about that same time, there was this corridor off to my left that I knew intuitively I'm to go that way. And I went down the corridor, and I could see at the end of the corridor a crib, a baby crib. And like I mentioned, Griffin, my little son who passed, he was still a toddler. He was still sleeping in a crib at the time he passed. And so I raced to this crib. And when I got there, I looked in, and there's my little boy. There's my Griffin, and he's sleeping, but he's fine. He's perfect. He's in the accident, he'd been ejected from the car.
Mm.
And that had just haunted me. And yet here he was. And I don't know, I swept him up in my arms. And I could feel it. I don't ever picked up a sleeping child. There's a weight
Mm-hmm.
and there's heat, and I felt him. I'm like he was solid against my body, even though I seemed to be in spirit. And I can feel his breath on my neck, and I'm thinking, he's okay. He's okay. And the senses, I leaned over and I smelled his hair. And I'm like, it's my little boy. I've got him. I've got him. And as I'm holding him and I'm weeping, and I feel this presence coming up behind me, this overwhelming, wise, cosmic presence. And I began to be fearful. I grew up in a conservative Christian home, and I'm thinking, that's God. That's God. And I'm holding my little boy, and he's here because I crashed the car. I dozed off, or I overcorrected, or I mean, his life was cut short. And yet the guilt's bubbling up, and the presence is coming closer and closer. And I'm holding him and weeping, and the presence is right there. And I failed, I've failed as his father. Is there any way I can be forgiven? And in that thought is when the lid it almost felt physical too. It's like these divine arms just wrapped around and held me and my little boy. And there was this download of peace and love and truth. And I'm having this thought, I hope I can be forgiven. And the first thing that came through, and it was beyond verbal communication. It was like, there's nothing to forgive. Everything is in divine order. And I'm like, how can that be? He's here. I mean, and I saw my life, I saw the things, and I thought, well, I'm sitting there thinking that was a mistake. I didn't mean to do that. And this divine being, whatever one wants to call it, God, the universe, the divine, I was held, and I was simply asked, what did you learn? What did you learn? Not the mistake, but what did you learn from it? And so I began to see my life differently. I saw things and I thought, oh, wait, that was wrong. And I knew it was wrong, and I did it anyway. And the beautiful God that held me said, well, that's your judgment of it, not ours. You're as precious and beloved and cherished as the little boy you hold. And I'm like, well, yeah, my little boy's perfect. He's beloved. He's divine. He's all of it. And it was an interesting experience because there I am holding him and then feeling that multiplied, not only to me, it was a very personal experience, but to every living soul, you know. No wonder I saw the nurse and her magnificence in the hospital. And no wonder I experienced these. I mean, it's like, wow, there is that much love. And there was no judgment. I experienced none of that. There was no comparison. It was simply pure, unconditional love of what did you learn? And then I was tutored on choice. And boy, resilience is a choice sometimes. Sometimes you just have to get to the next breath. I mean, I've just got to get to the next.
I call that gutting it out. It's a little bit different than resilience, right? Like sometimes we're just in the moment, and in the moment, all we can do is gut it out. It's like, I got to get to this next step. And then sometimes when we get a little bit of break, we can kind of get resilient about things and like really focus on some tools to like, okay, now I need to get myself support or help or whatever.
Yeah. And sometimes it's just like, I mean, people have said, well, how did you do this? It's like, I just kept breathing. I don't know how but in the arms of the divine, there was this thing about choice. And I was told I could be mad at God the rest of my life because this happened or was allowed to happen or because they passed or because, you know, and that was a choice. And there was no judgment in the choice. I got to choose. In fact, you know, I was told you can beat yourself up for the rest of your life because you were driving the car. That's a choice. But I was given this choice, and it was really interesting because here I am held by what I am feeling is God. And the communication was, I want you to exercise your will. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. No, wait a minute. I've been taught it's your will be done. From the time I was a little boy, it was your will be done. But what was communicated to me in this very personal situation was, my will is your will. That's how much you're loved. My will is that you have free will, that you get to choose. And there was this scenario where I was given the choice that I could give my son back. I could hand him over. I could trust and release and exercise my will. And here I'm giving him rather than feel like he was taken. And in all that peace and in all that beauty and all that love and truth, I kissed my little boy and I gave him back. But then, you know, wake up in the hospital bed to the amputation, the colostomy bag, the brace on my leg. I was a mess still, even though I was in the rehabilitation wing. And
how long were you there?
Just about 5.5 months in the hospital.
That's a long time to be in a hospital.
Yeah, and I mean, that was a year of rehab. I mean, I was in a wheelchair for a long time. I mean, the beautiful thing, and this meat sack, as we say, it wants to heal. I mean, I have injuries and I experience pain every day, but I learned to walk again. They were able to take all the, reconnect the intestines, and that everything worked there. I mean, my one good leg, if you will, still has 6 pins and a plate holding it together, and my back's all jacked up from the crack, but I'm upright. I mean, I'm upright and I'm breathing. And I was in a wheelchair for a while. I have dear friends that don't have the ability to walk or be ambulatory. And wow, I mean,
my boyfriend's in a wheelchair, 30 years.
Yeah.
It's a different life.
It's a different life. And I could say I had the opportunity to experience that.
Mm-hmm.
And wow, do I respect those folks?
Yeah.
What resilience that takes. I had a funny experience, a strange experience in the hospital. I was there and I was in the rehabilitation thing, and they had a little, not a gym, but it was a place where you have to go do physical therapy. It was stretching and moving and lifting. And I ran into someone there. Someone was there, and it was a fellow in a wheelchair, and I realized that we had actually been associated in high school. He didn't go to our high school. He was an athlete in a rival high school, and we recognized each other. And yeah, he brought to a very poignant way, you're going to get up and walk out of here. Or someday you'll be on a prosthetic and walk. I will never walk again. And I got real grateful real fast, in that moment. And anyway, yeah, it took.
That's part of resiliency, right? I mean, it's being honest and being able to account for where you're at without that judgment. And I think that probably for you, a little bit of that experience that you had in going to this place where there was not judgment, it was just like, well, what was the lesson? What was the thing gained?
Yeah, I mean, and support too. I mean, my gosh, my family, my brothers, I mean, they nearly lost their jobs, to come and sit with me in the hospital. My older brother was there. I mean, the abdominal injuries were horrible, and there was infections, and I don't want to get into all that, but they had to pack them. They would have to pack the wound, and then they'd have to strip that every day. It was part of healing. But the nurses at one point, and my older brother was there, and he was a trained EMT, and he's a first responder. He is a tough guy, man's man. But the one nurse started getting sick. She's puking because of what she's having to pull out of my gut, and it makes the other one sick. And both nurses are over there, and I love nurses. They're earth angels. They're both over the trash bag vomiting. It was nasty. And my brother says, I'll do it. I'll do it. And he stepped up and he gloved up. Now, his hands were not near as small, nor was he as gentle as the nurses. And he's packing this stuff in, and I'm wincing. And, I mean, we're talking to each other as men talk to each other, I suppose. And I thought, why is he so mean? Why is he so... I mean, my parents divorced when I was young, and he had become the father figure my whole life, and I respected him, but I thought, why is he so hard on me? But I just happened to look up. He's talking harsh to me about lay down, be still, man up. But I look up, he's got tears, running down, back in the gut of his little brother who may not ever walk again. I mean, I do walk again, but in that moment, they didn't know.
Yeah.
I learned what support is, learned what a real man is, learned what family can be. And of course, my brothers are certainly that to me, but to have support and then the situation, to be honest about it, there was always somebody who had it worse. There was always somebody that I could, look to that, I became grateful. It's like, wow, I'm going to walk. I mean, wow, every step's a miracle. He's not. And what a gift, right?
Yeah. It's interesting because comparison is such a thief of joy, right? When we compare ourselves to other people of like maybe what they have that's better than what we have or whatever, it can be such a thief of our own personal joy. But also it can steal our own grief, because sometimes we might minimize, like, well, at least I don't have it that bad, or you can victimize it on the other side. I have it way worse than anybody else, right? So it's interesting that kind of comparison can kind of get us in trouble a little bit, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, any kind of comparison, it doesn't work. I mean, if I'm comparing, it doesn't work. But in that moment, it was like, wow, okay, I'm going to lean into it. I mean, it was interesting too, coming home like that when I was in the wheelchair. And of course, I had a surviving son. And he had seen me in the hospital, but I was so worried about how is he going to deal with this? I mean, here I am in a wheelchair. I've got a colostomy bag. My right leg is in a brace straight out. My left leg is amputated off. My shoulder's in a sling. I had a little electric wheelchair that I could drive. I couldn't even go home yet. I was going to my brother's house, once again, supportive family. They'd been watching over my son while I was in the hospital.
Was this in Utah? Were you living in Utah?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It all happened in Utah.
A lot of the houses here are not really very accessible.
No, and my brothers had built a ramp so I could drive the little wheelchair up in. I mean, they'd gone the support system, but I thought, how am I going to support my son? It was, how can I? And here he is, 7 years old, and my brothers literally would have to pick me up and lift me into the wheelchair. I couldn't transfer into it with all that was going on. And as we arrived at the house, there's Spencer, my son, looking out the window, watching as his uncles, my brothers, are lifting me and putting me in the chair. And I'm like, how? I was the rough and tumble dad. How is this going to work? How will he ever accept this? And as I got in the chair and began to, navigate toward the ramp, he came running out of the house and he ran toward me, and then he ran right past. And I thought, it's too much, it's too much. I mean, gosh, my legs cut off and all that, and I thought, wow, this is hard, and I continued and turned to go up the ramp they had built. And I just looked to see where he went. And he had actually run across the street, and he began knocking on all the neighbors' doors. And he was saying, come out, come out. My dad made it home. Come see my dad. And I thought, oh my gosh. I mean, and then he eventually did come, and he threw himself on my lap, which just about killed me. I still had all the sutures from the abdominal. But I bring this up for a specific reason. I mean, he threw his arms around me, and I'm so glad you're home. And I explained they're going to make a cool Darth Vader leg for me. And, he was a Star Wars nut. I'm going to work really hard to get well, but it's going to be like this for a while. And I said, are you going to be okay? And we still laugh. He's full grown now. And in fact, he just made me a grandfather recently, but
congratulations. That's the best.
Yeah, it is. But here was the 7-year-old boy, and he's like, Dad, if you were nothing but a puddle of blood, I would still love you.
Oh.
And we wept. And the reason I bring this up, I mean, here I was in this realm in a wheelchair, holding my surviving son. And in that moment, that was no less divine than being on the other side, holding my son that passed in the arms of the divine. I mean, here I was. And the unconditional love, the non-judgment of my son, I'd love you no matter what, was every bit as powerful as the unconditional, non-judgmental, unconditional love of the divine. And, maybe I'm comparing again, but if I compared the two, they were both divine. Like heaven was right here. There was nowhere to go or nothing to become or anything to do. It was simply to be in that perfect moment.
Yeah.
And feel all of that and experience it.
I'm curious, did your 7-year-old son have any injuries, and who took care of him while all of this is going on for you? Just he stayed with one family member?
He was held in the hospital overnight. He had a cast put on, and he was released, and he went into the home of my young brother with his wife and stayed there with his cousins. And he's still very close to his cousins. We're a tight family, and he didn't have severe injuries emotionally. I mean, he lost everything I lost. Here's the interesting thing too. He had no experience. He didn't leave his body and be held in the divine. He didn't get to say goodbye to his mom and his little brother. I mean, we talked about that a lot. And as he got older, he's like, look, Dad, I got nothing. I mean, when he was about, 19, 20, he's like, I prayed every night just to fill my mom, and I got nothing. So his experience was way different than mine, but he's become the most compassionate man I know. I mean, he got involved in Big Brothers, Big Sisters. He was showing support for things. We just recently released a children's book, or what we thought was a children's book. He wanted to write, we collaborated to do something for kids who don't get the answers, who don't, I mean, people would say to him, oh, your mom's in a better place. And he would get angry. He's like, no, she's not. The best place is right here with me making banana bread. I mean, it doesn't work.
As somebody who has grieved and has been told that, it's like, it is the most offensive thing to tell people they're in a better place. No, the best place they could be with is with me.
Yeah. And he experienced that, but he turned out fantastic. And we did this book, and
what is the name of the book?
Beautiful. I mean, it basically gets down to, it's all love. It's all, even grief, which we've all experienced at certain levels and sometimes extreme levels. Grief just might be the highest
form of love.
Yeah. It might be the highest form of love. Yeah. I mean, we only grieve because we love, and therefore it's love.
Yeah. What is the name of the book?
The book that Spencer and I collaborated on is called Where Are You? it's that, where are you? I've looked in the garden and the kitchen and the stars, and you're nowhere to be found. But it comes around in a beautiful way where he realizes that they live on within us.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I can't wait to get that book. You know, my grandson was very close to my husband when he passed. He was only 4 years old. He still talks about him. He's 10 now. And last year he had an arterial venous malfunction, which is basically to say his brain had a hemorrhage. And so he's recovering from a stroke. And that's been a slow process. But that sounds like a perfect book for my grandson, because I know he feels his Papa John. And I know that our loved ones are not far away. They're just not far away. I am just really excited to have you share this story. It is a hard thing. And like, you don't carry this with you every day on your sleeve for everyone that you meet to say, I am a grieving man of this wife and this child that I've lost. So it's like, it's interesting, right? Because as our lives move forward, we meet different people. They come in and out of our life. Not everybody really knows these stories that really kind of craft who we are and our perspective of the world. I know that in losing my husband, John, it was the catalyst for the show. And I realized that I was too busy and too self-absorbed and too worried about taking care of my little family at times that I wasn't always maybe the kindest that I should be, or maybe I didn't give people grace to realize that maybe they were going through something hard. And, you know, this isn't to beat myself up. I think we're all guilty at some point in our lives. But through that loss, I've certainly become more compassionate, and a lot in part because of some similar experiences that I've had along the way that really made me realize that who I am is not just this person. I'm so much more than that. And I am connected to everybody here, and we are not separate. And I think that when you get that understanding, you start to hold space and you want this world to heal, right? We want a better thing for everybody because we know we're not separate.
That's so well said. That's what I was experiencing in the hospital. I was one. There was a oneness. Mm-hmm. And if we embrace that, you know, I mean, and life is challenging. I mean, things continue every day. Every day there's going to be situations where we get to make a choice. And, you know, things happen or things are done to us, or we do things. And there's always the judgment of, oh, I could have handled that differently, you know.
Right.
But when we realize that we are one, what we do to another, we're doing to ourselves. And if
it really gives us a different perspective, right? We want to move in the world a little bit better, a little bit differently.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And I believe we can. I mean, I really think if we lock arms, I mean, this whole, you know, if it doesn't matter where someone comes from, their culture, their beliefs, whatever, if we truly embrace ourselves in our uniqueness as one, we can lock arms and move forward in love and respect and honor and compassion and make the world a whole lot better place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. I look forward to having you at our Real Connections event, April 24th and 25th in Salt Lake. If you're interested, go to relentlesslyresilient.com. You can find all the information there. And as always, we will link the information to Jeffrey's website and to his book in the show notes. So thank you so much, Jeffrey, for being on our show today. I'm sorry that Jenny wasn't able to be with us, but I'm super excited to have you as a part of this Real Connections event in April.
It's an honor. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. It was just so great talking to you. If you enjoyed what you heard today, remember to subscribe to our podcast so you will be notified of the new episodes. And we would be so grateful if you would give us a rating and review. It helps others to find our show. Please share it with your friends. Let them know. We all need to hear lessons and remember that we're not in this life alone and that other people are doing hard things as well. You can find us on Facebook at Relentlessly Resilient or on Instagram, Relentlessly Resilient Podcast. Both platforms have a Calendly link set up to a time to pitch your story for our show. Remember, whatever you do today, remember to be kind. You have no idea the struggles others are dealing with in their lives. Have a great day.